My name is Christy, and I am 32 years old. For the past 2 years, I have been the only child who returned home and ended up paying every single bill for my family. Yesterday, after a massive argument where my mom screamed at me to pack my things and leave, I finally did exactly that. But before walking out the door, I canceled all the Autopay accounts I had set up for their bills. What would you do if your family treated you like an ATM instead of a daughter? Before I continue my story, let me know where you are watching from. And do not forget to like and subscribe to hear more real-life stories that might just reflect your own experiences. To understand why I found myself back in my childhood home at age 30, you need to know a bit about my family. My mother, Margaret, is 58, a woman who has always had a strong personality that often crossed into controlling territory. My stepfather, Harold, 60, came into our lives when I was 15, after my biological father walked out when I was 10. Completing our family is my half-sister, Vanessa, 24, the golden child who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. Growing up with my mother was challenging. Margaret had impossibly high standards that somehow only applied to me. Nothing I did was ever good enough. My room was never clean enough. My grades were never high enough, and my achievements were never worth celebrating. When my father left, it seemed to intensify. I became the target for all her frustrations, the convenient scapegoat for everything that went wrong in her life. "You are just like your father," she would say whenever I disappointed her, which felt like every single day. Those words stung more than she would ever know, especially after he abandoned us without so much as a goodbye note or child support check. When Harold entered the picture, I hoped things might improve. Maybe a new father figure would bring balance to our home. I was wrong. Harold quickly fell into the role of Margaret's enforcer. He never developed any real connection with me, always viewing me as an outsider in what he considered his new family. The contrast in how they treated Vanessa and me was stark and painful. Vanessa received praise for the smallest accomplishments. When she brought home a C on her report card, there were celebrations when I brought home straight, as it was simply expected. Vanessa got a car for her 16th birthday. I received driving lessons and was told I could save up for my own vehicle. These disparities created a canyon between us that never closed, though I never blamed Vanessa herself for the favoritism. The day I turned 18, I packed my bags and left for college. With scholarships, loans, and working 3 part-time jobs, I put myself through school and graduated with a degree in marketing. Those years were hard but freeing. For the first time, I could breathe without someone criticizing my every inhale and exhale. After college, I built a career in digital marketing. By 28, I had a good position at a respected firm, a small but comfortable apartment, and a life that I had created entirely on my own. I rarely visited home, limiting my interactions with my family to obligatory holiday calls and the occasional dinner when guilt overcame my self-preservation instincts. Then 2 years ago, everything fell apart. The company I worked for underwent massive restructuring. Entire departments were eliminated, mine included. At 30 years old, I found myself unemployed in an industry that suddenly seemed oversaturated with talent. Despite hundreds of applications, interviews led nowhere. My emergency savings dwindled rapidly. Rent in the city was astronomical, and soon I was facing eviction. I applied for every job I could find, even positions far below my qualifications, but the economy was tight. After 3 months of constant rejection, I made the hardest phone call of my life. "Mom," I said, swallowing my pride, "I need to come home for a while, just until I find another job." The silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes before Margaret finally responded. "Well, I suppose we have the space, But you will need to contribute to the household, Christy. We are not running a charity. I agreed to her terms, expecting to stay for a month or two at most. When I arrived with my 2 suitcases and box of professional awards that now felt mockingly hollow, I discovered something unexpected. My parents were struggling financially themselves. Bills were piled on the kitchen counter, many stamped with final notices. The house needed repairs that had clearly been postponed for too long. Even the refrigerator was sparsely stocked, nothing like the abundant pantry of my childhood. Over dinner that first night, I carefully broached the subject. Is everything okay financially? I noticed some past due bills. Margaret stiffened, while Harold stared intently at his plate. Vanessa, who still lived at home, despite having a full-time job, rolled her eyes. We have had some setbacks, Margaret admitted reluctantly. Harold's hours were cut back last year, and there were some unexpected medical expenses. I later discovered those medical expenses were actually Vanessa's cosmetic dental work and a vacation disguised as a mental health retreat for my mother. But that night, seeing their obvious distress, I made an offer that would change everything. Look, I have some savings left. Not much, but enough to catch up on these bills while I am looking for work. I can set up Autopay from my account for the monthly utilities until I get back on my feet. The relief on their faces was immediate, though mixed with something else. Pride, resentment. I could not quite place it then. That would be helpful, Harold said, the first words he had spoken directly to me since my arrival. Just until you find a job, Margaret added quickly. We do not need you to support us. But as the days turned into weeks and weeks into months, it became clear that they did need my support. The job market remained impossible, with only occasional freelance work coming my way. Meanwhile, I was paying for the mortgage, utilities, groceries, and even their cell phone plans. My savings dwindled rapidly, but whenever I mentioned concerns about money, Margaret would dismiss me. If you had been more careful with your career, you would not be in this position, she would say, conveniently ignoring that I was keeping their household afloat. Despite contributing nothing financially to the household, my mother and stepfather continued to treat me like an unwelcome guest who should be grateful for their generosity. The irony was not lost on me, but with nowhere else to go, and my resources dwindling, I had no choice but to stay and endure their treatment, hoping that the job market would improve before my savings disappeared completely. 2 years passed this way, with my temporary stay turning into something far more permanent than I had ever intended. The job market had improved slightly, but my confidence had been shattered by countless rejections and the daily reminders from my family that I was a failure. I cobbled together a living through freelance marketing projects, but nothing stable materialized. My daily routine became a suffocating cycle. I would wake up early to prepare breakfast for everyone, even though no one ever thanked me for it. Then I would spend hours sending out job applications and working on my freelance projects. Afternoons were dedicated to household chores, cleaning, laundry, grocery shopping, all tasks that somehow became exclusively mine, despite the fact that 4 adults lived in the house. Christy, you left streaks on the windows again, Margaret would say, inspecting my work with a critical eye. Honestly, how hard is it to clean properly? I taught you better than this. No matter how thoroughly I cleaned, she always found something to criticize. Harold rarely spoke directly to me, but he would nod in agreement with whatever complaint Margaret voiced. Their united front was impenetrable. Vanessa, meanwhile, lived a charmed life. At 24, she had a decent job at a local boutique, but she contributed nothing to the household expenses. Instead, her paycheck went toward new clothes, weekend trips with friends, and her car payments. She was exempt from chores because, as Margaret explained, she works full-time, Christy. She needs her rest. The inequity was glaring, but whenever I pointed it out, I was branded as jealous and ungrateful. You should be thankful we let you stay here, Margaret would remind me. At your age, most people have their lives figured out. The small, daily indignities accumulated like stones in my pocket, weighing me down. Margaret criticized my clothing choices. That blouse makes you look washed out, my friends. Why waste time talking to people who cannot help your career? And even the way I ate. No wonder you cannot find a husband chewing with your mouth open. Like that. One evening, while sorting through mail, I discovered something that made my blood boil. A credit card statement addressed to Harold showed charges for a weekend getaway to a nearby resort, a trip taken the previous month that no one had mentioned to me. Further inspection revealed charges for an expensive necklace purchased on Vanessa's birthday. They were using the money I contributed, money meant for essential bills, to fund treats and gifts that excluded me. When confronted, Margaret dismissed my concerns. We deserve some enjoyment in life, Christy. Not everything is about paying bills. I swallowed my anger, knowing that without me they would be unable to pay even the most basic expenses. But the betrayal stung deeply. Then came a glimmer of hope. A marketing firm in a neighboring city was hiring for a position that matched my skills perfectly. The salary was lower than what I had earned before, but it offered stability and, most importantly, a path away from my toxic home situation. I submitted my application and received an invitation for an in-person interview just 2 days later. The interview was scheduled for 10 in the morning on a Tuesday. Since I did not own a car, having sold mine during my financial crisis, I asked Margaret if I could borrow hers for the day. I cannot possibly let you take it, she said, though I knew she had no plans that day. What if something happens to it? Besides, that job sounds too junior for someone your age. You should be looking for something more appropriate. Mom, I need this job, I pleaded. Any job. I cannot keep draining my savings. Your situation is not our fault, she replied coldly. Figure it out, Christy. That is what adults do. I called my friend Eliza, who agreed to drive me to the interview. But her car broke down halfway there, and by the time we found alternative transportation, I was 30 minutes late. The receptionist informed me apologetically that the hiring manager had a tight schedule and had already moved on to other candidates. My opportunity was gone. When I returned home, defeated and fighting tears, Margaret was drinking coffee and browsing social media in the kitchen. How did it go? She asked, without looking up. I was late. They would not see me. Well, she said with a small shrug, maybe it was not meant to be. That night, I overheard her telling Harold, at least we do not have to worry about her moving out yet. Another month of bills covered. The realization hit me like a physical blow. They did not want me to succeed. My failure was convenient for them, a guarantee that their bills would continue to be paid. I went to bed that night, questioning everything about my situation and wondering how I had allowed myself to become so trapped in a cycle of emotional and financial abuse. The next morning, I found Vanessa using my laptop without permission. When I confronted her, she shrugged. Mom said I could. Besides, it is not like you were doing anything important on it. I checked my browsing history later and discovered she had been reading my emails, including correspondence with potential employers. The invasion of privacy was infuriating, but it was only the beginning of what would become the breaking point in our already strained relationship. 3 weeks after the missed interview opportunity, I received an unexpected email. A small marketing agency had found my portfolio online and was impressed with my freelance work. They offered me a position as a marketing coordinator, a step down from my previous role but with room for growth and a steady paycheck. The office was a 40-minute drive away, which meant I would need to figure out transportation, but the opportunity felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. I read the email 3 times, hardly daring to believe my luck had finally turned. The salary was modest, but it would allow me to save for my own place again. More importantly, it represented freedom from the suffocating atmosphere of my family home. I accepted the offer immediately and scheduled a start date for the following Monday. That evening at dinner, I decided to share my good news. I had prepared a special meal, Harold's favorite pot roast with roasted potatoes, and Margaret's preferred lemon meringue pie for dessert. I even bought a bottle of wine to celebrate what I hoped would be a turning point for all of us. "I have some news," I said, as I served the food. "I got a job offer today. It is not exactly what I used to do, but it is a start. I begin on Monday." I expected at least token congratulations. Instead, Margaret took a sip of wine and said, "Speaking of good news, Vanessa got promoted at the boutique. She is assistant manager now." "That is great, Vanessa," I said, sincerely turning to my sister. "Congratulations." "Thanks," she replied with a smirk. "Unlike some people, I know how to hold on to a job." Harold chuckled at her remark while Margaret launched into a detailed account of Vanessa's accomplishment, complete with praise for her work ethic and determination. My news was completely overshadowed, not even acknowledged. I sat silently pushing food around my plate as the familiar feeling of invisibility washed over me. After dinner, I cleared the table and began washing dishes while the others moved to the living room to watch television. Through the doorway, I could hear them continuing to celebrate Vanessa's promotion, planning how she might spend her modest raise. As I scrubbed a stubborn pot, their voices drifted clearly from the living room. They had no idea I could hear them. "What are we going to do about Christie's job?" Harold asked in a low voice. "What do you mean?" Margaret replied. "If she starts working, she will want to move out eventually. Who is going to pay the bills then?" There was a pause before my mother responded. "We will just have to make sure she stays here longer. The job is entry-level anyway. She will still need our support." "And our support means her money," Harold said with a chuckle. "We have gotten used to not worrying about the mortgage payment." "She owes us," Margaret said firmly. "After all we have done for her, letting her come back home when she had nowhere else to go. Besides, she is 32 and starting over. She should be grateful we are here for her." "We could make her feel guilty about leaving," Vanessa suggested. "Tell her how much you depend on her help around the house, Mom. That always works." "Or remind her how difficult it is to afford an apartment on her own these days," Harold added. "If we plant enough doubt, she will stay put." "Christie has always been easy to manipulate," my mother said, with a dismissive laugh that cut through me like a knife. "She is so desperate for approval. She will do anything if she thinks it will make us love her." I stood frozen in the kitchen, soapy water dripping from my hands as their words confirmed what I had suspected, but had been too afraid to acknowledge. They were using me, deliberately, strategically. They had no intention of ever seeing me as anything other than a resource to be exploited. The pain was so acute, I could barely breathe. I had given them every penny I could spare, depleted my savings, put my own future on hold, all while being treated like an unwelcome burden in the very house I was financially supporting. I finished the dishes in a daze and went to my room, locking the door behind me. I needed time to process what I had heard to figure out my next move. The new job was my ticket out, but I would need to be careful. Based on what I had just overheard, they would try to sabotage my independence if they could. The next day, I woke up early and checked my email before anyone else was awake. To my horror, I found a message sent from my account to the marketing agency. "After careful consideration, I must decline your job offer. Personal circumstances prevent me from accepting at this time. Thank you for your consideration." The email had been sent at 1 a.m. while I was asleep. Someone had accessed my account and rejected the job on my behalf. I immediately sent a panicked follow-up, explaining there had been a mistake, that my account had been compromised, and that I very much wanted the position. The response came quickly. "We are sorry, but after your rejection, we offered the position to another candidate who has already accepted. We wish you luck in your job search." Just like that, my opportunity was gone. Again. I stormed into Vanessa's room without knocking. She was still in bed, scrolling through her phone. "Did you hack my email last night?" I demanded. She looked up, startled by my tone, but not by the accusation. "What are you talking about?" "Someone sent an email from my account declining my new job." "Was it you?" Vanessa sat up, her expression shifting from surprise to defiance. "Mom said it was for the best. You were going to abandon us." "Abandon you? I have been supporting this entire household for 2 years. Whatever." She shrugged. "Mom said you owe us after everything they have done for you." I felt something break inside me, the last thread of familial loyalty that had kept me tethered to this toxic situation. Without another word to Vanessa, I marched to my parents' bedroom and pushed open the door. Margaret was applying makeup at her vanity. She looked up at me through the mirror, irritation crossing her face. "Christy, what have I told you about knocking?" "You sabotaged my job," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "You had Vanessa decline my offer." Margaret turned to face me, her expression carefully composed. "I did what was best for this family. You were not thinking clearly. Best for this family, or best for your bank account?" The words burst out of me, years of suppressed anger, finally finding their voice. "You have been using me since the day I moved back in." And that was how the biggest fight of our lives began. "How dare you speak to me that way?" Margaret stood up, color rising in her cheeks. "After everything I have done for you." "What exactly have you done for me, Mom?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady, despite the hurricane of emotions inside me. "Since I moved back, I have paid the mortgage, the utilities, the groceries, all while being treated like an unwelcome guest." "We gave you a roof over your head when you had nowhere else to go," she shouted, her finger jabbing the air between us. "You were a failure, Christy, 30 years old and couldn't even keep a job." Each word was a dagger, but I stood my ground. I lost my job due to company downsizing, not because of any failure on my part. "And yes, you gave me a room in this house. A house I have been paying for." Harold appeared in the doorway, drawn by our raised voices. "What is going on here?" "Your precious wife had Vanessa hack my email to decline my job offer," I explained, turning to face him. "They deliberately sabotaged my chance to become independent again." Harold's expression flickered with something guilt, perhaps, before hardening. "Christy, you are being dramatic. Margaret only wants what is best for everyone." "What is best for everyone? Or what is best for your bank account?" I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. In the past 2 years, I have spent over $45,000 supporting this household. Money that was supposed to be my safety net. Money that I will never get back. "We are your family," Margaret said, as if that explained and excused everything. "Family supports each other." "Support goes both ways, Mom. When have you supported me? When have you ever put my needs before yours or Vanessa's?" "Do not bring me into this," Vanessa said from the hallway where she had been listening. "It is not my fault you cannot get your life together." I turned to face my half-sister, the golden child, who had never known what it was like to be deemed insufficient. "You are 24 years old with a full-time job, yet you contribute nothing to this household. Instead, you steal my opportunities and help them keep me trapped here. You are just jealous because Mom and Dad love me more." Vanessa snapped, the cruelty of her words hanging in the air between us. I looked at her, then at Harold and Margaret, searching their faces for any sign of denial, any indication that they found her statement as horrible as I did. There was none. Is that what you think? I asked quietly. That this is about jealousy? You have always been envious of Vanessa, Margaret said, dismissively, from the day she was born. I shook my head, a sad laugh escaping my lips. This is not about envy. This is about basic human decency and respect. I came back here because I had no other options, and instead of helping me get back on my feet, you have done everything possible to keep me dependent on you while simultaneously making me pay for the privilege. That is not true, Harold protested, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine. Isn't it I heard you all last night talking about how to manipulate me into staying? How to keep the paychecks coming? Did you think I wouldn't find out? Margaret's face paled slightly. You were eavesdropping. I was washing the dishes from the dinner I cooked to celebrate the job you made sure I lost. I corrected her. And I heard everything. How I am easy to manipulate. How I am desperate for approval. How you plan to use guilt to keep me here. You are twisting our words, Margaret insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. Am I then explain why Vanessa sent that email? Explain why every time I get close to independence something happens to pull me back? No one answered. The silence was damning. I have tried so hard to be a good daughter. I continued, my voice breaking slightly. To be helpful, to be grateful. But nothing I do is ever enough for you. And now I understand why. Because if I succeeded, if I became truly independent, you would lose your meal ticket. That is ridiculous, Harold sputtered. We do not need your money. Then, why sabotage my job offer? I challenged. Why not celebrate my success instead of undermining it? Again, silence. I wanted to believe you cared about me, I said. The fight suddenly draining out of me, replaced by a profound sadness. That beneath all the criticism and control there was love. But people who love you want you to succeed. They celebrate your victories instead of ensuring your failures. If you are so unhappy here, Margaret said, her voice cold and hard, then maybe you should leave. Pack your things and go. The words hung in the air between us. Words she had probably expected would make me back down. Apologize. Fall in line as I had so many times before. But something had shifted inside me. The scales had fallen from my eyes, and I could finally see the situation clearly. You know what, you are right. I straightened my shoulders, suddenly feeling lighter than I had in years. I should leave. Margaret's eyes widened with alarm. This was not the response she had anticipated. Christy, do not be ridiculous. Where would you go? How would you support yourself? I will figure it out, I said, echoing her own words back to her. That is what adults do, right? I turned and walked to my room, pulling out my suitcases from under the bed. The same suitcases I had arrived with 2 years ago, filled with hope that my family would support me through a difficult time. How naive I had been. As I began packing, Margaret appeared in the doorway. Christy, stop this nonsense. You are overreacting. I continued folding clothes into my suitcase, not bothering to respond. What about the bills? She asked, her voice taking on a note of panic. The mortgage payment is due next week. And there it was. Not concern for me, but for the money I provided. I am sure you will figure it out, I replied coolly. That is what adults do. For the next hour, I packed methodically while my family alternated between trying to make me feel guilty and expressing disbelief that I would abandon them. Not once did anyone apologize or acknowledge the real issues I had raised. When I was finished packing, I made one last trip to my laptop. I logged into my bank account and navigated to the Autopay settings. One by one, I canceled the automatic payments for the mortgage, electricity, water, gas, internet, and cell phone bills. Then I logged out, closed my laptop, and placed it in my bag. Harold watched from the doorway, his face pale. "What did you just do?" "I canceled the automatic payments," I said simply. "Since I will not be living here anymore, I will not be paying the bills anymore." "You cannot do that," Margaret exclaimed from behind him. "We depend on those payments." "You should have thought of that before you decided I was more valuable as an ATM than as a daughter." I carried my bags to the front door, each step feeling like a victory in a battle I had not even realized I was fighting until now. No one offered to help me. No one tried to stop me. Their shock that I was actually leaving was palpable. At the door, I turned to face my family one last time. "I hope someday you realize what you have done. Not just to me, but to yourselves. Family should be about love and support, not exploitation." "You will be back," Margaret said, but her voice lacked conviction. "When you realize how hard it is out there on your own." I smiled sadly. "I have been on my own for years, Mom, even when I was living under your roof." With that, I walked out the door, got into the Uber I had called, and did not look back. For the first time in 2 years, I felt like I could breathe again. The road ahead was uncertain, but anything was better than remaining in that toxic environment for one more day. As the car pulled away from the house, I made a silent promise to myself. I would never again allow anyone, family or otherwise, to make me feel less than I was worth. The journey to rebuild my life would be difficult, but I was finally free to begin. The first few days after leaving felt like emerging from a dark cave into blinding sunlight, disorienting but filled with possibility. My friend Sarah welcomed me into her one-bedroom apartment, with open arms making space for me on her pull-out couch. "Stay as long as you need," she said, helping me arrange my belongings in a corner of her living room. "I cannot believe what they did to you." That night, over cheap wine and takeout, I poured out the whole story. Sarah listened without interruption, her expression shifting from disbelief to outrage. "Christy, that was financial abuse," she said when I finished. "They were literally exploiting you." Hearing someone else name what had happened gave me a strange sense of validation. I had not been oversensitive or ungrateful. What my family had done was wrong by any standard. The morning after my dramatic exit, I contacted the marketing agency again. I explained my situation honestly, that a family member had sabotaged my previous opportunity, but I was now living independently and extremely interested in any positions they might have. To my surprise and relief, the hiring manager was sympathetic. "As it happens, another junior position just opened up. Different accounts than the original role, but similar responsibilities. Can you come in tomorrow?" The interview went well, and by the end of the week, I had secured the job. The salary was modest, but it represented something priceless: freedom and a fresh start. For the first few days, my phone remained silent. No calls or texts from my family. I assumed they were giving me the silent treatment, expecting me to come crawling back when I realized how difficult independence would be. They underestimated both my determination and the depth of the damage they had caused. On the 7th day after my departure, my phone rang with Margaret's number. I braced myself before answering. "Hello." "The water is shut off." My mother's voice was a mixture of anger and panic. "We have no running water, Christy." "I am sorry to hear that," I replied calmly. "Sorry to hear that. This is your fault. You canceled the Autopay." "Yes, I did. Because I no longer live there." "You need to fix this immediately," she demanded. "Transfer the money so we can get the water turned back on." I took a deep breath, steeling myself against the familiar pull of guilt and obligation. "No, Mom. I will not be paying your bills anymore." "What?" She sounded genuinely shocked, as if the concept of financial responsibility was entirely foreign to her. "You cannot just leave us without water." "I did not leave you without water. I stopped paying for services at a house where I no longer live. There is a difference. We do not have the money right now. Harold's paycheck is not until next week and we have other expenses. Perhaps Vanessa can contribute, I suggested. She has a full-time job and a recent promotion. Remember? This is not about Vanessa. This is about you, abandoning your family when we need you. The irony of her statement was almost laughable. You did not need me, Mom. You needed my money. And when I tried to better my situation so I could continue supporting myself and helping out, you actively sabotaged me. Actions have consequences. I ended the call before she could respond, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. For the first time in my adult life, I had stood up to Margaret without backing down or giving in. The feeling was both terrifying and exhilarating. The water shutoff was just the beginning. Over the next 2 weeks, I received increasingly panicked calls and texts as each utility was disconnected. First the electricity, then the internet. Credit card companies and the mortgage lender began calling as payments were missed. My phone became a battlefield, with messages ranging from guilt-tripping to outright threats. You are killing your mother with stress. Harold. I cannot believe you would do this to your own family, Margaret. Hope you are happy now that we are suffering. Vanessa. I maintained radio silence for the most part, responding only to clarify that I would not be resuming payments and that they needed to take responsibility for their own finances. The situation escalated when extended family members began reaching out. Apparently, Margaret had been spreading her version of events that I had lived rent-free for 2 years before suddenly abandoning them in a fit of selfishness, leaving them unable to pay their bills. My Aunt Susan called first. Christy, what is going on? Your mother says you left them in a terrible financial situation. Did she mention that I paid all their bills for 2 years while they treated me like an unwelcome guest? Or that they sabotaged a job opportunity to keep me financially dependent on them while simultaneously draining my resources? Silence then. No, she did not mention that part. One by one, family members called with similar concerns, and each time I calmly explained the reality of the situation. Some were skeptical, unable to reconcile my account with the Margaret they thought they knew. Others seemed unsurprised, hinting that they had seen glimpses of her manipulative behavior over the years. After fielding a dozen such calls, I decided to address the situation directly. I spent an evening composing a detailed email outlining exactly what had happened during my 2 years living at home. I included screenshots of my bank statements showing the consistent outflow of money to household expenses, as well as the email that Vanessa had sent declining my job offer. I concluded with a simple statement. I did not abandon my family. I removed myself from an abusive situation after exhausting all other options. I wish them well, but I will no longer set myself on fire to keep them warm. I sent the email to everyone in the family, then turned off my phone for the night, emotionally drained but strangely at peace. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My inbox filled with messages of support from family members who had only heard Margaret's side of the story. Cousins I had barely spoken to in years reached out to offer encouragement. My uncle Robert, Margaret's own brother, called to apologize for believing her version of events. I should have known better, he said. Margaret has always had a way of twisting situations to make herself the victim. I am sorry I did not see what was happening to you. Not everyone was supportive, of course. Margaret's closest allies remained firmly in her camp, condemning me for airing dirty laundry and turning family against family. But for the first time, I did not stand alone against the tide of my mother's narrative. Others could now see what I had experienced. The most surprising response came from Harold's sister Linda, who called me directly. I want you to know that Harold and Margaret did the same thing to me years ago, she said, without preamble. They lived with me. After they first got married, promised it would be temporary, and ended up staying for 3 years. They contributed nothing but criticism and demands. When I finally asked them to leave, they told everyone I had thrown them out on the street for no reason. Her words were a revelation. The pattern of behavior I had experienced was not new or unique to me. It was their established mode of operation. "How did you handle it?" I asked her. "I did what you are doing now. I stood my ground, told the truth, and rebuilt my life without them in it. It was the hardest and best decision I ever made." By the end of that tumultuous week, two things had become clear. I was not alone in my experience with Margaret and Harold, and I was stronger than I had ever given myself credit for. The apartment hunt I had begun half-heartedly now took on new urgency. I was not just looking for a place to stay temporarily. I was building a new life. Sarah continued to be my rock through it all, offering both practical support and emotional validation. "I am proud of you," she told me one evening. "Do you realize how many people never escape situations like yours? You not only got out, but you are thriving." Thriving might have been an overstatement. I was sleeping on a pull-out couch and rebuilding my career from scratch, but I understood what she meant. I was reclaiming my independence, my self-respect, and my future. And that was worth more than any comfort or convenience I had left behind. 2 months after walking out of my family home, I had established a new rhythm to my life. My job at the marketing agency was going well. I had already taken on additional responsibilities and received positive feedback from my supervisor. I had found a small studio apartment that I could just afford on my salary, and while it was nothing luxurious, it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every decorative touch reflected my choices, not compromises made to accommodate others' preferences or criticisms. I had minimal contact with my family during this time. Occasional text messages from Margaret alternated between guilt trips and vague attempts at reconciliation, but I maintained firm boundaries, responding politely but briefly. Vanessa had stopped communicating entirely after I declined to lend her money for car repairs. Harold sent a single message asking if I would reconsider helping with the mortgage just until they get back on their feet, which I also declined. From extended family members, I heard that things were difficult at the house. The utilities had been reconnected after several days of disruption, but only after Margaret and Harold had to borrow money from relatives. They had listed some of their more valuable possessions for sale online. Vanessa had moved in with a friend unwilling to deal with the reduced circumstances at home. I felt sympathy for their situation, but remained firm in my decision. Their financial crisis was not my creation. It was simply the reality they had been avoiding by using me as their safety net. Now they were facing the consequences of years of financial mismanagement and entitlement. Then, on a rainy Saturday afternoon, there was a knock at my door. I was not expecting visitors, and Sarah was out of town for the weekend. Peering through the peephole, I was shocked to see Margaret, Harold, and Vanessa standing in the hallway outside my apartment. For a moment, I considered not answering. But curiosity and a strange sense of calm determination won out. Whatever they had come to say, I was strong enough to hear it now. I opened the door, but did not invite them in. "This is a surprise." They looked different than I remembered. Margaret's carefully maintained appearance had slipped. Her hair was unstyled, her clothes rumpled. Harold looked thinner with dark circles under his eyes. Even Vanessa seemed subdued, lacking her usual confident demeanor. "May we come in?" Margaret asked, her voice lacking its usual imperious tone. "Please, Christy, we need to talk." I hesitated, then stepped aside to let them enter. My studio apartment was small, with barely enough seating for 4 people. They perched awkwardly on the edge of my futon and the single chair I owned, looking around at my modest but comfortable space. "What can I do for you?" I asked, remaining standing. Margaret and Harold exchanged glances before Harold spoke. "We are going to lose the house, Christy. The bank is foreclosing. We have nowhere to go." "I am sorry to hear that," I said, meaning it despite everything. "Have you looked into assistance programs or payment plans?" "We tried," Margaret said, her voice breaking slightly, "but we are too far behind, and no one will lend to us anymore." "What about your jobs, Vanessa's promotion?" Vanessa looked down at her hands. "I lost my job. The boutique closed last month. And my hours were cut again," Harold added. "It is not enough to cover the mortgage and other expenses." I could see where this conversation was heading, and I braced myself. "What exactly are you asking of me?" "We need help," Margaret said simply. "We thought, maybe we could stay here with you, just until we get back on our feet." The irony of her using my exact words from 2 years ago was not lost on me. I looked around my tiny studio apartment, barely 400 square feet of space. "That is not possible," I said quietly. "There is no room here, and more importantly, I do not think living together would be healthy for any of us." "So you are just going to let us be homeless?" Margaret's voice took on a familiar, accusatory edge. "After everything we have done for you?" "Mom," I said, keeping my voice level, "I lived with you for 2 years. During that time, I paid the mortgage, the utilities, and most of the other household expenses. I did the majority of the housework, and in return I was criticized, manipulated, and actively prevented from improving my situation. What exactly did you do for me that I should feel indebted to you now?" Harold stared at the floor while Margaret's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Vanessa, surprisingly, was the one who spoke up. "She is right, Mom," she said quietly. "We treated Christy terribly. We used her." Margaret turned to her younger daughter with shock. "Vanessa, how can you say that?" "Because it is true," Vanessa replied. "I saw it happening and I went along with it because it benefited me. I never had to pay for anything or take responsibility because Christy was handling everything. It was wrong." The admission from Vanessa, the last person I expected to acknowledge the reality of the situation, left me momentarily speechless. Margaret seemed equally stunned. Harold cleared his throat. "Christy, I owe you an apology. We all do. You were right about everything you said before you left. We did take advantage of you. I convinced myself it was justified because you were living in our house, but the truth is you were keeping that house afloat while we treated you like a burden." I had imagined confrontations with my family many times over the past 2 months, but I had never envisioned this scenario, them sitting in my apartment, actually acknowledging their behavior. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Is it just because you need something from me again?" "Partly," Harold admitted with surprising honesty. "Desperation has a way of forcing you to face uncomfortable truths. But also because losing everything has made us realize how badly we treated the one person who was actually trying to help us." Margaret had tears streaming down her face, now her usual composure completely broken. "I do not expect you to forgive me, Christy. I would not in your position. But I am truly sorry. I was so focused on maintaining a certain image, on making sure Vanessa had everything I thought she deserved, that I lost sight of what really matters. I lost sight of you." Her words touched something deep inside me, the part that had always yearned for her acknowledgement, her approval, her love. But I had learned the hard way not to trust words alone. "I appreciate the apologies," I said carefully. "But you understand why I cannot simply invite you to move in with me or start paying your bills again right time. They nodded, defeat evident in their postures. That does not mean I will not help at all, I continued. I cannot offer money or housing, but I can offer guidance. Help you create a budget, find jobs, maybe connect you with resources for housing assistance. Hope flickered across their faces. But I have conditions, I added firmly. First, complete honesty about your financial situation. No hidden expenses or debts. Second, you all need to actively participate in solving your problems, sending out job applications, cutting unnecessary expenses, possibly selling the house before foreclosure to salvage some equity. And third, respect for my boundaries. I will help as a consultant, not as a provider. They exchanged glances, then Harold nodded. Those are fair terms. More than fair considering everything. We will do whatever it takes, Margaret added, her voice steadier now. And Christy, thank you, not just for this, but for standing up to us. It was the wake-up call we needed, even if we did not recognize it at the time. For the next hour we sat at my small kitchen table as I helped them outline a plan. Margaret would apply for jobs in retail or customer service, a step down from her previous administrative position, but more readily available. Harold would look for evening work to supplement his reduced hours. Vanessa would focus on finding a roommate situation to reduce housing costs. They would contact the bank about a short sale of the house, rather than letting it go to foreclosure. As they prepared to leave, Vanessa hung back. I am really sorry, Christy, for everything, especially for sabotaging your job opportunity. That was unforgivable. I looked at my half-sister, seeing her clearly, perhaps for the first time, not as the golden child who had everything handed to her, but as someone who had been shaped by the same dysfunctional family dynamics that had affected me just from a different angle. We all make mistakes, Vanessa. What matters is recognizing them and trying to do better. After they left, I sat alone in my apartment, processing the unexpected turn of events. Their apologies seemed sincere. Their desperation certainly was. But years of manipulation had taught me to be cautious. Only time would tell if this represented a genuine change or just another strategy to secure my help. Regardless, I had set clear boundaries and offered help on my terms, not theirs. It was a profound shift in our family dynamic, one that acknowledged my worth and agency. Whether our relationship could be rebuilt on this new foundation remained to be seen, but for the first time, it felt possible. I sent Sarah a long text explaining what had happened, ending with, "They actually apologized. All of them. I am still processing." Her reply came quickly. "Proud of you for holding your ground while still being compassionate. That is strength." Strength. Yes, that was the word. Not the absence of vulnerability or the hardening of my heart, but the courage to stand firm in my truth while still remaining open to possibility. It had taken losing almost everything to discover that strength within myself, but now that I had found it, I would never let it go again. 6 months passed, bringing changes I could never have predicted on that rainy Saturday when my family appeared at my door. True to their word, they had taken my advice and actively worked to improve their situation. Margaret found a job as a receptionist at a local medical office, a position that paid less than she was accustomed to but provided stability. Harold increased his hours and took on weekend work at a hardware store. Vanessa moved in with 2 roommates and secured a position at a coffee shop while taking online classes in business administration. They did not manage to save the house from foreclosure, but they negotiated a short sale that at least protected them from further financial damage. They now rented a modest 2-bedroom apartment, a significant downsize from their previous 4-bedroom home, but within their means. Most importantly, They were paying their own bills, living within their income, and gradually addressing the mountain of debt they had accumulated. Our relationship had transformed as well. I maintained a careful distance, joining them for occasional dinners, but preserving the independence I had fought so hard to achieve. Margaret still occasionally slipped into her old patterns of criticism or control, but now I could recognize and address these moments immediately. Harold had become more respectful, actually listening when I spoke, instead of automatically deferring to Margaret's opinions. Vanessa and I were developing a relationship as adults and equals rather than as rivals in a dysfunctional hierarchy. The marketing position that had been my lifeline had evolved into something more. My experience and dedication had earned me a promotion to team lead with a corresponding increase in salary. I had moved from my tiny studio to a one-bedroom apartment in a safer neighborhood, still modest but comfortable. I was building a network of friends and colleagues who valued my contributions and respected my boundaries. On a personal level, the healing process had been complex and nonlinear. There were days when anger would resurface, unexpectedly triggered by a casual comment or memory. There were nights when I would lie awake, questioning whether I had done the right thing, or whether I should have tried harder to make things work with my family. Therapy helped me navigate these emotions, understanding that healing was not about erasing the past, but integrating it into a stronger, more authentic version of myself. One Sunday afternoon, as I was preparing for the week ahead, I received a text from Margaret. Just wanted to say, I am proud of you. I know I did not say that enough before. The words brought unexpected tears to my eyes. For so long I had craved her approval, her acknowledgement. Now that it came, I found it mattered less than I had imagined. My sense of worth no longer depended on her validation. Yet the message still touched me, representing not just her growth, but my own. I had learned that sometimes the deepest expression of love is knowing when to walk away, not as an act of cruelty or revenge, but as a necessary step toward health and wholeness. By refusing to enable my family's toxic patterns, I had ultimately given them the opportunity to change, an opportunity they might never have taken if I had continued in my role as their financial safety net and emotional scapegoat. The journey had taught me to recognize the difference between genuine love and emotional manipulation. True love builds up. It does not tear down. It celebrates growth rather than creating dependency. It respects boundaries instead of exploiting vulnerabilities. These insights had transformed not only my relationship with my family, but all my relationships, helping me form connections based on mutual respect rather than obligation or fear. Perhaps most importantly, I had discovered my own resilience. The woman who had returned to her childhood home in desperation, believing she had failed at adult life, was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who understood that true strength lies not in never falling, but in rising every time you fall. Someone who knew her worth was inherent, not dependent on others' assessment or approval. My story does not have a perfect fairy tale ending. My relationship with my family remains a work in progress, requiring vigilance and clear boundaries. There are still difficult conversations and occasional setbacks. But we are moving forward on a healthier path, one step at a time. If my experience has taught me anything, it is this. Sometimes the most difficult choice, walking away from those who claim to love you but harm you, is the first step toward genuine healing. Not just for yourself, but potentially for everyone involved. Setting boundaries is not selfish. It is an act of courage and integrity that creates space for authentic relationships to develop. I no longer regret the 2 years I spent supporting my family, even through their manipulation and criticism. Those years taught me lessons about myself and about human nature that I might never have learned otherwise. They were the crucible in which my true self was formed, testing and strengthening me in ways that easier circumstances never could have. Sometimes when I look at my life now, my job, my apartment, my friendships, my growing sense of peace, I am amazed at how far I have come. The journey from that moment when my mother shouted, "Pack your things to where I stand today," has been arduous but transformative. By honoring myself enough to leave a toxic situation, I opened the door to a life I never could have imagined, while trapped in cycles of obligation and emotional abuse. Would I have found the courage to leave if my mother had not uttered those fateful words? I cannot know for certain. But I am grateful that when the moment came, I found the strength to take her at her word, to pack my things, cancel those Autopay accounts, and step into the unknown. In doing so, I did not just change my circumstances, I changed myself. So if you find yourself in a similar situation, trapped in relationships that drain, rather than nourish you, giving endlessly, while receiving criticism in return, know that you deserve better. Setting boundaries is not just your right. It may be the most loving thing you can do, both for yourself and for those who have grown accustomed to taking you for granted. Have you ever had to make the difficult decision to walk away from a toxic relationship, even with family? What gave you the strength to finally draw that line? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if you found value in my journey, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share with someone who might need to hear that it is okay to choose themselves sometimes. Thank you for listening. And remember, your worth is not determined by how much you give or how much you endure. It is inherent, unchangeable, and entirely your own.